Hello, comrades, and welcome to another video on the Chinese Revolution area of study 2. In this video, we will explore Fanshen, which was the policy of, a literal translation is turning over, and land reform for the peasants. So let's start with the Agrarian Reform Law. So land reform, as we know from area of study 1, had long been a focus of the Chinese Communist movement. In both the Jiangxi Soviet and the Yan'an Soviet, land reform was always a major concern, with peasants considering it the fundamental element of the revolution. And as we know, peasants were the majority revolutionary class for the CCP. On the 28th of June, 1950, the CCP brought in the Agrarian Reform Law, which sent thousands of party officials to the countryside to organize a nationwide redistribution of land from landlords to peasants. And that's why it's referred to as Fanshen, which means turning over. So turning over land from the landlords to the peasants. This image shows a landlord kneeling before a people's tribunal. And we'll find out more about that right now. So speak bitterness. Once landlords had been identified, speak bitterness meetings were held for people in the village to denounce the landlords. These meetings were incredibly emotionally charged, with people making accusations after years of being exploited or mistreated. After these speak bitterness meetings where people could denounce the landlords, a people's tribunal decided the fate of the accused. If a landlord, like the one in the picture before, was judged a local despot, his property would be shared out among the peasantry. If a landlord was particularly despised, he would be beaten or executed. At the beginning of Fanshen, landlords who were considered to be fair, treating people who worked on their land fairly, were treated leniently and given enough land to support themselves. But basically, all landlords had to give up some land, whether it was all of it or some of it. So the land reform laws escalated, and once the class struggle and passions of rural people had been unleashed, the communists found them far harder to contain than they had anticipated, with even small landowners being targeted by people's tribunals. The Korean War had brought greater fear of counter-revolutionary influences, which hardened attitudes towards landlords. And during this period, between 1 and 5 million landlords were executed. 47% of China's farmland was redistributed to poor peasants during this time. And land reform brought much support to the new regime, with Mao giving his full support to the judgments and punishments dealt out by people's tribunals. So if we compare this to the initial stages of post-revolution in Russia, when it was really the secret police that dealt out punishments and that took the land from the landlords. In China, it was really left up to the peasants, which the peasants really supported. So here are a couple of quotes from historians. First of all, Philip Short. He says, "Peasants who killed with their bare hands the landlords who oppressed them were wedded to the new revolutionary order in a way that passive spectators could never be." So what he's saying here is that by giving control to the peasants in terms of what happens to these landlords, whether they were executed or beaten or had their land turned over, those who were actively involved in that were far more engaged with the revolution and were far more supportive of the new regime. Historian Frank Dicotta called the land reforms a pact sealed in blood between the party and the poor. So here is another analysis table on Fanshen and land reform. So the major challenge facing the new regime was only a third of China had undergone land reform by 1949. There was a need to fulfill the promise of land reform made to peasants during the revolution, and a desire to eliminate feudal landlords who were seen as an obstacle to creating a socialist society. The communist response, first of all, the 1950 Agrarian Reform Law launched a nationwide campaign of Fanshen, turning over of land and property. Peasants were mobilized to denounce landlords in these speak bitterness meetings and to decide their punishments in people's tribunals. The outcome of all of this, 1 to 5 million landlords were executed, 47% of China's farmland was redistributed to poor peasantry, the landlord class was largely destroyed, and communist cadres or communist members were recruited from each village to lead peasant associations, which would later be used to undertake collectivization and the Great Leap Forward, which is a future topic that we will explore. So I hope you found this video on the initial land reforms of the new regime useful and interesting, and I will see you next time.